right. So welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So today we're going to be looking at something a little bit different,
Yeah,
and I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
I think so too.
We are going to be talking about the power of trying not to try, which sounds a little paradoxical,
Very much so.
but we're going to be drawing from a book called Trying Not to Try
Oh, yeah.
by Edward Slingerland.
Yeah.
And we'll be taking a look and seeing what we can find
Wonderful.
and see if we can get anything useful out of this idea.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, this idea comes from ancient Chinese thought and philosophy, and yet it's so applicable to even our modern lives today.
Yeah, I mean, who hasn't had the experience of, like, you're trying to remember something,
Yeah.
and it's just right there on the tip of your tongue.
Yeah.
But the harder you try to remember it,
Yeah.
the further away it seems to get.
Absolutely.
And then when you finally just kind of like,
Yeah.
give up,
Right.
all of a sudden it just pops into your head.
Exactly.
It's the weirdest thing. But I think a lot of us have had that experience.
Well, and it makes sense if you think about this idea that Slingerland calls Wu Wei,
Okay.
which is often translated as effortless action or non-doing.
Mm.
Now, before we go any further, it's really important to clarify what Wu Wei isn't.
Okay.
It's not about being lazy or
Right.
passive.
Right.
It's more about cultivating a state of effortless flow
Okay.
where actions arise naturally, spontaneously, without that sense of forceful striving.
Right. So I guess I can see how it could be misinterpreted as laziness.
Right?
But it's really not.
No, not at all. It's more about being in the zone, as some people say.
Okay, so how does this ancient idea of Wu Wei apply to our very modern, goal-oriented world?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's actually more relevant than you might think. So much of what we do, and even how we think about success today,
Yeah.
is about pushing harder, striving for more, always trying to achieve and accomplish.
Right. But what Slingerland suggests is that maybe that's not always the most effective approach.
Exactly. And in fact, modern research in fields like psychology and neuroscience is starting to show that this ancient idea of Wu Wei might actually have some scientific backing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So what kind of research are we talking about here?
Well, one example is the concept of flow state.
Oh, yeah. I've heard of that.
You've probably experienced it yourself. It's that feeling of being completely absorbed in an activity
Right.
where you lose track of time
Yeah.
and effort just melts away.
Like when you're playing music.
Exactly.
Or, for me,
Yeah.
when I'm writing, sometimes I'll get into that
Yeah.
kind of flow state
Yeah.
where I look up and like hours have gone by.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I didn't even realize.
And it feels effortless, right?
Yeah.
You're not forcing it. You're just in the groove.
Right.
And athletes describe it as being in the zone.
Mm.
Musicians might call it being in the groove. It's a state of effortless focus, peak performance,
Right.
and it aligns perfectly
Mhm.
with the principles of Wu Wei.
So to be clear, for our listeners, the flow state is an actual psychological state that's been recognized
Yeah.
and researched. And it's something that Slingerland connects to Wu Wei.
Precisely. Slingerland argues that Wu Wei is the path
Yeah.
to achieving this flow state. It's about
Yeah.
letting go of that rigid, overthinking mind
Right.
and allowing actions to unfold naturally.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
One of the examples that really struck me
Yeah.
in the book was about learning a new language.
Right.
Slingerland says that.
Mm.
Trying too hard to memorize
Yes.
all the grammar rules
Yeah.
can actually be counterproductive.
Yeah.
It's when you immerse yourself.
in the language
Yeah.
and you let your brain naturally absorb the patterns that you start to make real progress.
Yeah, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because our brains
Yeah.
are actually incredibly good
Mhm.
at recognizing patterns
Yeah.
and making connections when we aren't, trying to force the process.
Right. So all of this is fascinating, but I'm wondering, how can someone actually cultivate Wu Wei in their own life?
Well, the good news is there are some practical strategies that Slingerland outlines in his book.
And these practices can help us access this state of effortless action.
Okay.
So one of the key practices is meditation. Now, I know that might sound a little woo or esoteric,
Yeah.
but meditation really helps train us to observe our thoughts without judgment, and
Yeah.
this detachment from the trying mindset
Mhm.
is central to Wu Wei.
Right, okay.
By quieting that constant mental chatter,
Mm.
we create space for this effortless flow to emerge.
Right. It's almost like we're getting out of our own way.
Exactly.
Like we're silencing that inner critic.
Yeah.
That's always telling us we're not good enough. We're not
Exactly.
doing it right.
Precisely.
And that allows us to just be in the moment and let things happen.
Exactly.
Okay, so meditation.
Well, one key practice. Another practice that Slingerland highlights is mindfulness.
Okay.
And this is really about paying attention to the present moment without judgment.
Okay.
And it can be as simple as really focusing on your breath
Mm-hmm.
or noticing the sensations in your body as you go about your day.
Okay.
And what mindfulness does is it helps us become more aware of our thoughts, our feelings, and our physical sensations. And this awareness can help us start to break free from those habitual patterns of overthinking and striving.
Right. So it's not just about emptying your mind.
Right.
It's about being present
Yeah.
and aware of what's actually happening in this moment.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got meditation, we've got mindfulness.
Right.
Anything else?
Yeah, actually, Slingerland also talks about the importance of physical activities like yoga or Tai Chi. And these practices emphasize fluid movement and being present in your body, which can help cultivate that sense of effortless action.
So it's this combination of quieting the mind and moving the body. That can help us access Wu Wei.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's about finding that balance between effort and ease, control and surrender, and ultimately recognizing that sometimes, letting go of that tight grip of conscious control can actually lead to better outcomes.
Yeah. It's so counterintuitive.
It is.
But it makes sense when you think about it. I mean, we've all had those experiences where we're trying so hard to make something happen and it just backfires.
Exactly.
But when we relax and we let go, things often seem to fall into place.
Yeah, and that's the power of Wu Wei.
Right. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Wu Wei, I want to leave you with a final thought. Think about an area of your life where you're currently struggling or feeling stuck. Could applying the principles of Wu Wei, this trying not to try approach, help you see things differently? Could it help you approach challenges in a new way?
That's a great question for everyone to consider.
Yeah. And if you want to learn more about the fascinating concept, I highly recommend checking out Edward Slingerland's book, Trying Not to Try. It's a really insightful read, and it offers a lot of practical advice on how to cultivate Wu Wei in your own life. So until next time, happy diving, everyone.
Happy diving.